get started here. Thanks for joining us, everybody. So if this is your first time, we do these every week, just a little community call. Obviously, we've been off for the holidays in the States, Christmas, New Year's, obviously. So, yeah, we've been off for a bit, but we're back. So there's not a ton to share, but we have some interesting stuff coming up, so definitely excited to chat about that. Yeah, today is the 3rd of January, 2023, which is wild. Happy New Year, everybody. Super excited for what's to come for Astro in 2023. Breaking news, we've got Astro V2 is coming. This is maybe shocking, but we have some breaking changes, and Vite 4 is coming out. So lots of exciting stuff coming. Basically, yeah, ES build, and Vite and a couple other things are changing. So actually, I don't know if ES build is part of that, but we have a handful of major PRs that are out there right now. So you'll see those being merged in the next couple days. And yeah, just a heads up that's coming. There aren't a ton of breaking changes on our end, but Vite 4 is definitely a major one. There are definitely some Markdown and MDX things coming. Content collections being unflagged is a big one. Things like that. So we can definitely chat about that some more, but just a heads up that's coming. All right, let's check out what's going on in the Astro repo. So, yeah, this is the year-end stats here. So, I think we had, 11 PRs get in, half of the open issues getting resolved. Really awesome activity from everybody, especially during the quiet holiday period. Let's see. This is this the same thing?
No, that's the.
Oh, this is the month.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there was a lot happening all of December. So 82 PRs, 60% of our open issues getting resolved. So that's pretty wild. This morning, we got you 1.9, so that's kind of the last of the minor releases before 2.0. Not that we're scared of 1.10, but it just happened to line up like that. So yeah, we started out the new year with 1.8, but here we are, 1.9 already. So 2 weeks, 2 minor releases. There's a couple things to share. Content collections got a few fixes, like just some weird edge things, like import.meta.env.dev was always true. That won't be the case anymore. The way that we create slugs has changed a little bit. We now have, more consistent URL-friendly slugs, so that's really great. Yeah, some always fun stuff with spaces and special characters and special characters in the file name. So some bugs fixed there. Should be much better now. And yeah, as before, this is still behind an experimental flag, so make sure you flip that on if you want to play around with it. This is just because there might be some breaking changes. Of course, we have really great docs on this. You can hop over to the docs.astro.build site and find your content collection guide. So definitely check that out. We have a new command called Astro Sync, which is pretty cool. So this will generate the types for your content collections. So if you need to do that manually, you're certainly welcome to use that command. And this is also referenced in the docs, so definitely check that out. So yeah, this all these changes, a ton of people have been involved. This is just going to shout out some community contributions to Astro Core. So this was a pretty great one. Huge thanks. RSS should now respect the draft option in your Markdown and MDX files. Yeah, previously it would always include your drafts. So now you can manually filter this on or off, which is very helpful. Andrea added a great fix for Vercel users, which was causing some annoying, hard to figure out errors related to parsing. So this was very helpful. Much appreciated. Yeah, better types are always appreciated. So much thanks to Sagara. Added some typings for the server.headers object if you're using our config file. Yeah, this is a very helpful PR where the base of the path would be added to a hoisted script. So this will not happen anymore. Whoa. I don't know if you all heard that audio or it was just me, but there were loud fireworks in my headphones that caught me off guard. Cool. Fuzzy, do you want to take over this section?
Yeah, if you don't mind. There's just a wee shout out to the folks who've helped us over the holiday period. There's 3 heroes that I've picked out the support squad this week. There are TomEverson is recent. I think he's rejoined us again. I'm pretty certain he was here before, but relatively new to the server. Right, he's been helping out quite a lot recently, and not just his platforms, but in a number of the channels as well. Wasim is just honestly coming in and giving as much time as possible and crushing it and helping folk. And Bryceguy, what can I say? He's such a nice guy. But yeah, so 3 absolute legends. Appreciate all the work, and everyone else who's managed to help out in the past couple of weeks. Really do appreciate it, guys. Yeah, so that's my 3 heroes. And thank you, thank you, and thank you.
Amazing.
One more. There's a particular hero that I would like to call out, for the past month. Well, past number of months, right? That is our very own Bjorn, part of the core team. He's just done a phenomenal job, and he's just so proficient at what he's doing. Knowledge of Vite just helps secure Astro and help, shore Astro up in a lot of places. Fantastic. Really do appreciate it as well. So special call out to Blue.
Awesome. I think we're jumping right into doc stuff here. So cool. Thanks, Fuzzy, and thanks everybody in the support squad. Cool. Looks like we do have Sarah here. I don't know if you've seen these, so maybe a surprise for you, but tons of activity in the docs.
I like the community call karaoke. Okay. So what do we got? Hey, I was busy. So some of Team Docs took a holiday and some of Team Docs did not. So, yeah, we still had activity. We're here because people are taking advantage of some downtime maybe during this season to actually play around with Astro. So we wanted to keep the docs active, and we wanted to make sure people knew they weren't being ignored and try to get whatever fixes in we could.
Ah, that's amazing. Over the last month, y'all have been super busy. 109 pull requests, tons of closed issues. Sarah with
That
well over 150 commits.
That was one of the downtime days. I woke up to 40 issues in the docs repo, and by the time I put the computer away, I had it down to 22 issues in the docs repo.
That's
So
amazing.
that's what quiet time is good for.
Nice. Oh yeah, we still got this up. Is this? Oh, this is the MDX stuff. So,
Yes.
exciting change that hopefully none of you noticed.
So quick update, because it has come up once already. If you are a docs contributor and you have not pulled to sync your docs repo lately, it's looking a little different. So before you make your PRs to docs from your branch, make sure you have Astro Docs latest and greatest, because it's a little different now.
Nice. Look at this. Merry Chris merge.
Yes, this was, I don't know if you can see the date on there, this was December 25th. And it did not stop. Our translators and our new contributors, so it was quiet, but it was still active. So thank you to everyone who stuck around, who saw a typo and fixed it, who translated a page. You were obviously taking advantage of some downtime to get into docs, and that's what I was doing too. So I was happy to maybe be a bit more responsive than I've been able to be, because you were my number one task. Well, you were my number two task. So you can also take a peek at what Corbin and Chris and I managed to merge on Friday, December 30th. This was a long-standing project that we'd been working on for the last sprint that we really wanted to get done before the new year for everybody with their new year, new Astro sites. This is new. This is all new. You can see in the sidebar, we've got now migrate to Astro. So give me a day to not think about having to write the migrate from V1 to V2, but this is what we got. We have 12 new pages for you. Many of them are, as we like to do in docs, many of them are stubs. Many of them are waiting for your contributions. We've pre-filled with some great basic information to get you started from one tech stack to another. But when you're on these pages, you'll see that you are invited to, the very last link in these is community resources, and we're linking to blogs. We're linking to YouTube videos. So if you have a resource, if you converted your site, come PR the appropriate stub page and add your link, and we'll link out to you, because we just want to give everybody the best support that we can.
Amazing. Super great work on that. Sarah and Corbin, I believe, jumped in on that. Really awesome to see.
And then, of course, Chris took care and made it look nice and fixed all our little things, because Corbin and I just like to write.
Yes. Looks beautiful as always. Great. I think that's it. As far as the slides go. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Excellent. I'll tune out, and welcome back, Nate, and everyone.
Thank you. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, like we mentioned, Astro 2.0 is very close on the horizon. So I think there might be some stuff we wanted to chat through, Matthew. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Talk about changes that are contentious.
Yeah, that seems like a good use of our time.
Yeah, yeah, we can do that. I would just note that I don't think Fred is on the call,
Yeah.
and because of that, I don't want to approve any breaking changes without everyone's on, at least everyone on TSC, which is yourself, myself, and Fred.
Yeah.
Having discussed it. So, but it's still worth discussing now.
Yeah.
So where we are, our hope is to release the beta today. We'll see how that goes. We're getting pretty close. So once the beta is released, there's still going to be opportunities for breaking changes. So there's a few things that Ben has brought to our attention in the last week as he's been working. A few things. So, Ben, which one is like the thing that you think?
Which is
Most-
spiciest?
No, well, no, I wasn't gonna go that way, but you can go that way. Whatever you think.
Yeah, the ones I'd prefer discussing. Sorry to interrupt. But the front matter injection ordering is one that I remember you commenting on, and I just wanted to discuss this one a little bit, especially since it's been floating around in our issues and support forums for a few months now, since front matter injection was released, really. But there is, if you've used front matter injection before, you know that from a remark or rehype plugin, you can add front matter that will be applied to all of your Markdown and MDX documents. The only thing it doesn't let you do is access the front matter that's already in that document. So if you wanted to grab an existing front matter property and use that to add a new front matter property, like computing a title or computing a URL from a slug, you couldn't do that. You would have to manually read the file with the file system, which some plugin authors are already doing, in order to grab that user front matter some other way in order to get those values. So because content collections also doesn't have a solution for this, we just expose whatever remark computes. Just went ahead and added the user front matter to the remark and rehype plugin object. So there's this fancy data object that used to have an empty object where you could apply front matter properties. Now that object is fully populated with all the front matter from the file. So if you wanted to modify front matter or access front matter to compute something else, you would now be able to do that. And it would be on the plugin author to make sure that they're not like overriding user front matter when the user doesn't expect it or some other circumstance like that. So it's a small change that gives more power to those plugin authors that wanted to see that feature. And there is an existing feedback and ideas channel that I will link here where we've been sort of discussing this and other authors have sort of weighed in. Chris from the M2DX project comes to mind. But yeah, that is the change here. And the breaking part is that now, since plugins can access the user front matter, they could technically be deleting properties they weren't deleting before. So they have to make sure to have a null check before setting any values. That's really the only thing, which is also in the change set.
Cool. I think that makes sense. Is this really only for existing like Markdown and MDX? Like this doesn't really overlap with content collections at all? Is that right?
Right. So there is a small change to what it's called in content collections, because something that came with this is like, okay, now you're not really injecting front matter, and we already had a bunch of support problems where the documentation said injecting front matter and no one found it because they were thinking, oh, I want to modify front matter. So I said, okay, modify seems to be like a word people understand a little better. So changing it to sort of like modifying front matter or changing front matter, and to mirror that, changing what it's called in content collections to a remark plugin front matter is what I explicitly call it here, as like this is coming from the remark plugins. This is not coming from your schema, so it will be untyped and it will be separate. which isn't a change from how it used to be. It's just a name difference to make it more explicit, like what it's actually doing. Because yeah, it was a little unclear. But yeah, it doesn't affect content collections in any other way.
Cool. That makes sense.
Ben, is the data here read only? Or is there like a mutability risk here where plugins could be stepping on each other when they go in order?
Yep, plugins can step on each other. And I raised that as like, I don't know if we want this. And then a few of the plugin creators came in and said, well, as a library author, I would responsibly check if a value is already present before setting it. And I would prefer for the library author to have that flexibility instead of Astro saying, no, you can't do that and making things read only. So I took that advice and decided to do it here. Of course, that does have the consequence of like if multiple people are doing it, you have to make sure that they're not all setting the same property. But assuming the library namespace is properly, then it shouldn't be an issue.
I'll just say my comments on this in the thread. I don't disapprove of this at all. I was thinking ahead to when we eventually, hopefully, have the ability to runtime markdown, to like pull markdown from like a CMS, and some concerns with it tying things into our build pipeline. How is that going to block runtime markdown? But it's already is kind of tied to that, so that problem kind of already exists. So I feel like that's a problem for a later time. That's going to possibly require breaking changes anyway. So I don't have any issue with this change.
Yeah, this would definitely be a temporary thing because we're in a funny universe right now where you can either import front matter or use content collections. And at some point we would want to like allow remote markdown and strip out all of our fancy remark behavior to just say like, yeah, if you want to compute things, you would have to like compile that markdown at runtime. You would have to run it through your own remark tree at runtime and figure it out there. So I'm just treating this as like a stepping stone to solve a problem for 2.0, and then in 3.0 we can like really reconcile the collections universe with the other universes and decide where to go from there. Because I think remote markdown has like been on our minds as like the next streaming or the next SSR, the thing that we have to think ahead to. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that seems totally reasonable. I don't think we need to come to a consensus or anything here, but definitely just wanted to get these changes in front of people. Matthew, we could definitely do like a TSC meeting and get through all these if we want to. But while we have folks here, can definitely look at them now as well.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I'll ping you about doing that. But yeah, Ben, you want to roll right along? I think you have 2 more.
Yeah, so we can. I think from our discussion, we should table the pages discussion, the pages param, because it's like it feels wrong, but removing it also feels wrong. So we should probably have a better discussion about the use case of it, the fact that it exists today, and what it does. So I'm going to move that to draft, and we can discuss the Markdown and MDX config rework, which is the only other big change I have here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is a bigger change that's sort of reshuffling based on pain points that we already have with configuring MDX specifically when you're dealing with remark plugins. So I shared another thread of feedback and ideas, got some great suggestions from Chris that shaped the extend default plugins and what we're changing it to. So a few good things to come out of this. First off, Smarty Pants was removed. We are now one dependency lighter in Astro Core, which is great. And it also had a lot of opinions. I personally didn't totally know what it did, but you're totally welcome to like add it back to your config if you need to. Oh, sorry. What was that?
Can you explain what that plugin does? I've seen it a million times. I really don't know what it does.
I know. The only feature I know is that it changes quotes to, I call them fancy quotes, the ones that are like curled on the ends. Docs people, you probably know the term for that. But that's that's the only thing I know of.
It's like sometimes it'll be called like typographer or something. It converts your like dumb characters to like the actual typographic version. A lot of tools will have it enabled by default, but it's really not a huge deal.
Okay, so we were doing that for everyone. What's the reason to remove it? Did some people not want it? I guess.
So I remember Chris sharing that it wasn't widely used or wasn't sort of in the knowledge base. Is Chris on the call? If so, then that would be helpful. Or no? Okay. I can go back and reference his comment, but it was generally that, yeah, not as widely used, and it was also confusing to have. This isn't a good reason to remove it, I'll be honest. But the other thing I noticed was extend default plugins is an unclear name, but if you truncate it down to one plugin, you could just call it the GitHub flavored markdown flag and move on, which was helpful for making the names a lot more visible. So I think if we added it back, we'd probably break it out into 2 flags, where it used to be extend default plugins, and you would just document what those are. Now it would be a GitHub flavored markdown flag and a Smarty Pants flag, and you can true false them how you wish. So I didn't have a strong opinion about removing it, but adding it back, I think we would use a different flag.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I like the idea of flags. If this is something where you mostly just want all of the GitHub flavored stuff, or don't want them, I should say. That makes sense to me. Yeah, we could talk about Smarty Pants, but yeah, keep going. Didn't mean to stop you there.
Yeah, and also to speak to Lorenzo's point, like maybe Astro having fewer defaults for Markdown is a good thing to make our pipeline a bit leaner so that we can move towards a more remote content future. So just pulling things out where even some members of core can't explain it. I can't explain Smarty Pants very well. It just felt natural. But yeah, we can discuss that separately when I can sort of ask Chris what the opinions were, and if other people on the call have opinions about Smarty Pants. But to at least rock through the rest of these while we're here. So as I mentioned, extend default plugins, kind of an unclear name, change to a GitHub flavor markdown flag so you know what you're enabling, and you can set it true false. And we also removed the behavior where if you apply a remark plugin, it will blow away our defaults. That was a little confusing to people. It's very implicit behavior. So now we just don't do that. We will apply GitHub flavored markdown even as you're adding your own config, and you can manually turn it off with the flag if that's what you're looking for. And the bigger changes are to MDX, where now it has all of the markdown options available in MDX. Before it had this like special config options documentation where we kind of documented things twice in 2 places because MDX had their own flavor of what the markdown config had. Now it's been aligned. So markdown and MDX have the same set of options. And if you were to set an option in MDX, it would override whatever you have set in your markdown, defaulting to whatever you have in Markdown. So you can set syntax highlighting for MDX specifically. You can set your Shiki config for MDX files if you need to disable it. All of that stuff is now there and much easier to document because it's just the same set of options. And that also meant we could remove the extend defaults multi-enum thing that even I was confused with as someone who spent 2 days wrestling with what it should be called. So now it's just called extend markdown config true false, where you can say, yes, extend all of the markdown options and override them if you want. And if you set it to false, then it just won't apply any of your markdown config to MDX, and you can sort of recreate that config in your MDX integration, if that's what you're looking to do. So yeah, that's the big simplification, just sharing options across both of them so that they feel aligned. And that's it, really. We had to update the MDX README and config references, also a little bit on docs so it's more clear. But I'm glad we got some early docs feedback because if it's easier for them to explain, that's probably a good sign that the config is simpler and people will understand it better. So yeah, that's everything there.
Cool. Thanks for that, Ben. Yeah, definitely worth going through the conversation here. Yeah, we can look through this, but I know you've put a ton of thought into this. And this is super helpful context, and seems like it'll make everything a lot easier for folks. This is one of those features that has just kind of grown and grown, and it's always worth taking a
God,
moment,
yeah.
taking a step back, and making sure it has the right API surface. So really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool.
So is there one more, right? The content collection one, does that one need to be discussed now?
Yeah, I moved it to
Draft.
draft because there's a lot of contention. If we have time, we can discuss it here to see what other people think. But this was definitely like a more interesting one. So, okay, if you're here for contention, let's discuss it a little bit. Unless there's other ones we need to get to.
Not from me.
Okie doke. So yeah, Nate, if you want to click on it, it's the draft one at the moment. But this was around at least trying to resolve some issues I've seen with content collections where we put your config file and your generated types in the source content folder, and that has led to some confusion across sort of two angles. The first one is around types generated being in source content. It's like, do I ignore this file? Why is it here? Shouldn't it be at the root of my project maybe? So to resolve that, was planning to move types generated to the base of your project instead of putting it in a nested folder so that it's more visible and you can disable it if you want with a git ignore without having to do like a nested path or any of that. And the other one that's more contentious is moving the config to the base of your project as well. I loosely called it content.config alongside your astro.config. And the reason to move it, first off, keeping the source content folder just to your content and not having any config files in there. That could open a future where your content folder lives somewhere remotely. It lives in a separate folder in a mono repo. It doesn't have to be inside of your source anymore. And as long as the config file is still in source content, it's a lot harder to let you configure where your content lives. So moving it out of that folder might open up some config options there. And the other one is around the fact that the content config is processed separately from the rest of your project. So you might like try to import a JSX file into it and expect it to work, but it doesn't because we're loading it separately from everything else in source. So to avoid any confusion around that and making it more clear, like we process the content config the same way we process Astro config, which is separately. Just thinking moving it to the base of the project would make that parallel a bit more obvious that like it's just another config file and you can put it here. And the contention has been around like, what do you name it? Content config doesn't sound very official to me. And Docs has also mentioned like, it's really nice to document the content folders where everything lives, including the config. Putting it at the base makes it just a little bit harder. So I decided to put it back to draft to see if we can find a different way to resolve these issues. Thanks, I had it. Thanks, Sarah. But yeah, that's sort of the state of the union there. It seems like types and config could have problems in the future, and I'm trying to find a way to sort of get ahead of that. So if anyone has thoughts on this change, if they actually like it, if they actually prefer it, respond now in chat or anywhere else. Otherwise, I might go back to the drawing board on this.
I think just for my sense of this, my gut reaction is like config in the content folder seems a little seems like it makes more sense. Also like that classic node ecosystem, like let's throw all the config files in the root
yeah,
is kind of irritating. And it also is not super clear to me that it's like this is an Astro specific file. It's a little confusing. I wonder if, as far as the generated types, there is a benefit to those being in your source directory, right? Because your project includes any TypeScript file in the source directory by default. So I wonder if that goes to the root of source rather than source content.
So that's a fun one. When it comes to DTS files, it will apply from the project root, so there's not really anything lost by putting it at the root. But yeah, there is a separate thing though around in the original RFC, the generated types go in a .astro folder. That was removed for the experimental release because it's hard to include a .astro folder for global types in your project. You have to add more TS config in order to like rope it in, because dot files are ignored by TypeScript by default. Very fun default. So I feel like the ultimate future is to put these in the .astro directory. It's just there's a lot of finagling with TS config that I wanted to leave out so users didn't have to add a bunch to try the experimental feature. So maybe moving it is just not a good idea right now if we know .astro is the eventual home, and just yeah, keep the config and types where it is. It's valid.
Yeah, I guess I'm not super clear on like what problems it's solving right now, other than like aesthetically we don't love it. But yeah, it's definitely confusing whether to ignore the generated types or not. I think that's going to be confusing no matter what.
Do you mind if I kind of jump here from a use case?
Yeah, please do.
So I'm working on like essentially rebuilding the tower website with Astro. Posted in the showcase of it. One of the things that I'm kind of using content collections overall for is each collection is essentially a different source of upstream content, for instance. So like one might be some API guides from one repo, another one might be some more how-to guides or something like that. One of the flexibility pieces I like is being able to kind of treat each collection kind of in silo, having its own config or something like that. So I wonder if it makes sense, or if it's something you guys consider with content collections, instead of lumping all of the content or all the collections into one config file, to kind of move it into each one of the collection subfolders and have a config in each one of those subfolders or something like that. So it's almost breaking it apart into some smaller files instead of one big monolith.
Fun fact, that's where the RFC started. We had separate config for each collection, and that ran into a lot of separate issues around like, well, I want to reuse config across multiple collections, so I have to create a shared file and import it into each one. The answer is yes, and that kind of rubbed people the wrong way. It also prevented generating multiple schemas for a collection, or like generating configs, I would call it, where it's like maybe you want to loop over all of your translation directories and generate collections for all of them with associated schemas. If you have one config file, you can sort of get crazy with that and actually like generate defined collection calls for all those folders, which was a pretty nice upside. And the last one was around, I think just having a bunch of JavaScript live alongside the collections wasn't great for some content authors. I spoke with Chris, who manages a nonprofit where they take a lot of requests from users where they're adding markdown files to these individual collections, and to avoid muddying it with like config files that they don't want people to touch, they really like the collection folders just being the content and nothing about configuring that content. So keeping the config separate sort of prevents that duality. So some of it is preference, some of it is to enable more things, but we're feeling pretty good about one config file for all collections.
Cool. And I guess you can always kind of extract it out to multiple files and then import it if you wanted to in some way.
That was the thinking, yeah. Because when you do it the other way, it's very opinionated. But when you keep it in one config, you do let people do both. They really need it. But I'm on your team. That's where I started. And I was like, okay, I get it. So it's there's opinions on both sides. But yeah, thanks for calling out.
Yep.
Awesome. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that's a super valid use case, and definitely something we put thought into. I think there is still this notion that content collections are still being refined. Obviously, it's been a really long process to get to this point, but there might still be changes, which is why it's experimental. But yeah, I I think the single file makes a lot of sense for the trade-offs we are looking at. Cool. Yeah, Ben, I would say if this one is seeming contentious and not really finalized, draft definitely seemed like a good thing. We can definitely sync with you if you're not sure where to take this. If that sounds fair.
Oh yeah, totally. I really just wanted to get it out there. Like, if I did this, would people like it? And it sounds like it doesn't make things more clear to move it to the base, so we're not going to solve that problem. Good to know. And moving the config out of source might not be super helpful, especially when it's a TypeScript only file, which is different from our Astro config. So given that, I'm probably going to close this issue since we're already going to move. And no, what I'm going to do instead is figure out the story of making the .astro folder, since that was part of the RFC, and that's eventually where types generated should live. So instead of doing this like half measure to move it to root, come up with like a solution for .astro, and then we'll revisit config at a later date if it becomes a problem. I'm only trying to get ahead of like, is remote content a thing, but it's a distant future. So we don't really have to worry about that for like a 2.0 baseline.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's a really good question in the chat about like why there are two config files anyway. Technical constraints, I assume, of type generation and things like that. I'm guessing.
Some of it, yeah. There was also some pushback on, because I did mention like, should it just go in the Astro config? And there was feelings like, that'll make the Astro config very bloated, and I think of configuring my content as a different thing that I'm doing. So I kind of like putting in the separate folder and saying, oh, this virtual module, this Astro content, that's only accessible from the, well, it's not only accessible from the config file, but having it there and not in your Astro config kind of felt good. So I could kind of go either way. I do agree, like if we move it to the root, putting it in the Astro config itself would probably make the most sense. But it's not enough for me to move it, I don't think, since there was pushback on it.
Cool. So yeah, still thinking of that one through a little bit. But yeah, I think that plan with .astro sounds pretty good to me. Cool. Yeah, appreciate the feedback. This is all super helpful, real world stuff. Can't beat it. So thanks for jumping in. Cool. Is there any other stuff? Ben, obviously a lot of these are coming from you. Matthew, is there any other things in here that we should chat about now?
No, almost everything's been merged. Ran into an issue with it creating the CI release that I'm currently trying to fix.
Okay.
Once that's fixed, I'm gonna merge in Bjorn's last internal fix. And then I'm gonna try to discuss with Fred. Maybe you can hop on too after this. Whether we can get these two markdown related changes in now, because it would be great to get them in the first beta if no one objects. So
yeah,
that's kind of the plan. And so yeah, expect the beta to come out in a couple hours or so.
Cool. That sounds amazing. Awesome. I definitely won't keep y'all here longer than we need to. So I think this is a totally fair place to end. I know some people just jumped in. Apologies for the timing there. But yeah, I think we can call it here. Cool. Thanks, y'all. Yeah, keep an eye out for the beta 2.0.
Sarah, how did you get Astro on DevDocs?
She's not joking when she says, "Bruv," right? By a pure force of nature.
Like, legit, is there a process for it? Like, because that was a lot of pages. Actually, look, there was a lot of pages there, and I'm like, if you did it by hand, dang.
Yeah, there is a process. If you go there, they do say what their process is. But it was a little facetious of me to say that I got it there. I saw a tweet or a
Simon got
toot
it.
or something
Simon.
a while ago. Yeah. And so I only recently discovered about them, and because we keep getting feedback about having our docs offline. We had somebody say, I'm going to be going on vacation. I want docs on my Kindle. We do get this feedback every now and then. So I saw Dev Docs and I looked, and I swear we weren't there. I did not see us there. So then I just I wrote it in my notebook, and now that everybody's back, today I said, like, hey, yet again, we just got more feedback about offline docs. Let's try to get on. Anybody think we should get on Dev Docs? And somebody actually looked again today, because I hadn't visited the site today, and we're there. So yeah, Simon, one of our community members, apparently put us on there. So that's the way in which I willed it to happen. But yeah, when I was there before, apparently there is a process. Like, if you go to the site, there's a link to click to say, here's how you get your docs on here. So yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is genuinely awesome. I have no, like, just, it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we're necessarily Kindle ready, but it's something that's come up like every now and then. It repeatedly keeps coming up that people do want offline docs. So yeah,
advertise this, because this is pretty big, you know. You only get to join when you're on Dev Docs. You're basically one of the big guys at that point in time. You know. It's
well,
the official
exactly. Exactly, that's it. So I remember months ago, like, Fred saying that he wanted to put out like the equivalent of an ebook kind of thing for Astro Docs. But to be on Dev Docs, I think is kind of cool. Like, people are just gonna have it. So yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. Great to see the Astro community come together. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Simon.